Hello and welcome to the Red Hook Dev Q&A. This Q&A was recorded on February 7th, 2023 as part of Steam Next Fest. Red Hook co-founders Chris Bourassa and Tyler Sigman sat down to discuss all things Darkest Dungeon 2 and answer community questions in this 2-hour stream. So without further ado, please enjoy the Q&A. So where did the inspiration for some of the areas in Darkest Dungeon 2 come from? This question comes from Todd Zilla on Discord, and he likes the feeder in particular. He thinks it's truly inspired and was just wondering where inspirations for regions like that came from.
Well, it's a great question, Todd Zilla. Thank you for that. I think each region was meant to sort of show like an apocalyptic or calamitous end to a I don't know, an emotional resonance kind of made manifest. So the fitter is like, it's all meaty and gross. And that's really kind of, gluttony, and each region kind of is a response to the end of the world. So the people who live there just gorge themselves because they're like, smoke them if you've got them kind of thing. Whereas the city is, meant to sort of tell the story of the loss of civilization, the loss of knowledge, kind of the crumbling, edifices that people erected that, we think will last forever, and how transient that stuff is. And then meanwhile, the denizens of that region, available in the demo, are sort of, melting away and really nihilistic and harming themselves out of spite and sort of just raging anarchy in the face of the end of the world. So every region is a little bit of a twist on that central theme of how, like, a potential response to kind of calamity, I guess.
Yeah, like the first game was, the hamlet and the estate are, it's so isolated. Like, you have no idea what the rest of the world is, and the stagecoach is like what brings things in, but everything is kind of just sandboxed, I guess, siloed. And so here's our chance to actually explore what's outside. And I thought that's interesting, like the idea, obviously all the zombie apocalypse type movies are popular, those stories. And in a way that this is our take, not on the zombie part, but on the stuff that was hinted at the end of DD1, I guess, which is like the world getting consumed and then what would happen. And so I guess, the other regions, right, you could talk about the Tangle, like how did the Tangle's the forest, and they have a totally opposite way of having reacted to the end of the world versus the city.
Like pure resignation and just stupor, kind of, when something so terrible happens that you just kind of just sat in shock and can't move past it. So I just like the idea that, and it's wet, it's heavy, it's rainy. I think our environment team did a fantastic job on all the locations in the game, and they all deliver, a nice range of color palettes, and I think call back to the regions of the first game. Like, we launched early access with 3 dungeon types in DD1. We launched early access with 3 regions in DD2, and added another one. Added the fish one, 4th in both cases. But we've kind of learned a lot about how to craft them, and I think. In a recent update, we added a lot of variation and some tonal and more claustrophobic elements to some of the regions, and I think it really brought them to life and fleshed them out. So.
So speaking of those regions, as you mentioned, we have 4. Weird Leninist on the Steam chat would like to know, do you have any ideas for any supplementary regions coming up?
For sure. An ice level's mandatory, right, in every video game? No, we've managed to avoid that.
Or the stream is over.
There's always ideas. We're not ready to hint at anything, but I think that, I don't know, one nice thing about Darkest Dungeon 2 just as a whole is, like, we've never really been lacking for ideas. It's always a matter of just trying to choose which ones to do. I think that's true of both characters, environments, monsters, and I think that just having worked on the game, that's always been one of the strengths and one of the fun parts is it's just so easy to brainstorm stuff, but not easy to actually execute, right? So we always try to choose carefully. And
that was one of the reasons why we wanted to do another Darkest Dungeon game. Was we talked about not doing another Darkest Dungeon game. We were in my basement there, just shooting the breeze, and it would mean leaving all these great ideas behind. And I think that was, very compelling reason to revisit the heroes and the space and the world that we had created. So
yeah, we were kind of tired of working on Darkest Dungeon towards the last DLC of DD1, as you might expect. It had been 5-6 years of our life, and but the interesting thing happened with a little bit of downtime, and as we started to think about what's next, and yeah, threw other ideas at the wall of like, DD in space, or who knows, all kinds of different things, and we just both started getting really excited about revisiting the world again. And I think that was like key, because there's the commercial side where you're like, hey, this game did really well, which we're super grateful to everyone watching
Yes.
for the fact that it made our dreams a reality, quite frankly. But there's also, so you can look at like the sequelitis, but we also wanted to do something we wanted to work on again, because we knew we're signing up for another 5 years or whatever. And, when you start adding it up, you don't have a lot of 5-year chunks to play with. And sorry, but it's true. And so I think
it's a game without hope, but we're all dying.
Yeah, but
5-year increments.
Slowly, hopefully slowly. But yeah, it happens. You can't do every idea you have, and the characters in particular were something that we realized we weren't done with. The world for sure, but the characters were kind of the thing that that's where you get the most memes, the fan art, the mods. Everything is really kind of the world. The world is the backdrop, but the characters are kind of like the vehicle through which you move through it. And we both started just getting super jazzed about exploring them more. Like one thing we did, if everyone's read the backstory comics that we did in DD1, but that happened like later,
after the fact, yeah.
Right? Then we started exploring, and defining their backstories in more, and so when we started thinking about actually doing that via the game, in Darkest Dungeon 2, you can go to these shrines of reflection and actually both listen, hear, and play through these pivotal moments. Generally depressing moments, but pivotal.
None of them are great.
And the characters, and so I think I think for both of us that the ability to dive back into those characters was something that we found a lot of motivation in wanting to make DD2.
Sorry, I have to move closer to you because my head keeps
really?
lining up exactly with this pillar.
Do I need to take some pillar time?
You don't want to merge?
I would love to merge with the pillar. At last, I would know.
He moved over, so I gotta.
Okay, I just need like half my head off the pillar.
Fair.
It's a professional organization.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Moving on. Okay, so we kind of have a design question here. What is the process that you follow when designing new heroes and abilities, and how do you work their backstory into their kit? That question is from Tranquil on Discord.
2 in a row that they didn't sneak the second question into the name.
Very impressive. Very restrained.
Hero design, and in particular, the mechanical design for both DD1 and DD2, it's always started organically with thematic nature. Like I think that's there's kind of 2 ways you can go about design. Is you have a mechanical idea first, and then you figure out a theme to fit it, or you go theme and go down. And I think one of the strengths of just Darkest Dungeon and having a great artist, creative director, illustrator as a partner here is like there's so much material to work with. And so like on DD2, we brought on another designer by the name of James Henley. He had been like a streamer on DD1 a lot, and actually had been a game designer in the past at BioWare and some other spots. So we brought him on early to help build heroes in DD2. And so I guess the process is like, especially when you're doing the first few heroes, it's purely thematic. As you start building out your roster, then you have to start thinking about, okay, we need someone in the back row. Like we don't have enough back row hitters, or we don't have enough support, or we don't have enough tanks, or whatever, that sort of thing. But we always try to like fit that to the theme of the hero. And in this case, because we were building off an existing game, it was really fun to go from, in DD1, there were 7 skills that heroes could have. And in DD2, we've enlarged that to 11, as well as you could have more skills mapped on your skill bar at one time. And so in some cases, we were able to basically directly transfer those skills over to the new combat mechanics, the token system. But, even when we did, there's 4 new skill slots. So I guess the short answer is just like it's always an organic process that then we look at where the holes are mechanically afterwards, as opposed to kind of strictly starting mechanically and then going from there. I think it's just been fun to work in this game for that reason, because it's not abstract. Like, you have visuals and story to go off of, and so everything from naming the tokens that, you know, a lot of the heroes have specific like tokens that are, only for them. Like those are always named after their sort of somehow their backstory and theme, stuff like that. And then also I think like you're involved in the hero designs too. So we always kind of try to start at the top and just sketch out like loosely what do we want them to do, and then you start filling it in, and then you look for holes through playtesting and stuff like that. I think there's another question coming on balance, so we can get that one later. But
yeah, like for the Runaway, we introduced fire as a damage over time effect in Darkest Dungeon 2, and so we knew we needed a fire-centric hero. And I mean, it could ever an archer with flaming arrows. Like you kind of work through the expected. I feel more conventional ideas, and then try to find something kind of unique and fitting of kind of the Darkest Dungeon vibe, which is we really put a lot of effort in trying to approach things creatively at a little bit left of center, so that there's some interesting hooks and surprises just as you learn about the character, and then that opens up a lot of possibilities for skill design. If you're working with a kind of a young hobo with a fiery poker, then that can get the game designers thinking about like how best to really encapsulate those values and that identity in the skills, as opposed to like, okay, fire archer, well, he shoots a fire arrow that leaves a pile of fire. So you can accomplish the same things mechanically, but it just has a little bit more flavor if you start with theme.
Definitely. As you mentioned, like we've upped the amount of skills each character has. Previously there were 7, now there's 11. Mothic Horror from Discord would like to know, which hero was the hardest to update with these expanded sets?
This I had meant to ask James right before the stream and didn't. So I'm going to come back to that one, and I will find an earpiece or something, and someone will whisper that.
Absolutely.
Maybe. Okay, I'm going to go on a ring here, and just this is also segueing into one of my favorite mechanical kits, which is the Occultist. I think the Occultist is really cool because we decided to. Like, we've never been short on taking risks in terms of we'd rather have an interesting texture of heroes where balance may not be uniform, especially initially. So I guess I'm jumping the gun on one of those other questions. But I think I'm just going to segue in, one of the coolest things I think is the Occultist, and how with the token system, what we were able to do with that is create this idea that he's playing with this eldritch power that he can barely contain, and so mechanically the way we did that is that he builds up these power tokens that you can then consume to do amazing skills, but if you don't consume them, they can burn him up. And so I think maybe it's not so much that was the hardest, although that's mechanically challenging because you have to sort of balance that, but we like the idea of, like, in every game, there's usually the options for the heroes that are a little safer and more straightforward to play, and then the heroes that are have super high gain, super high possibility, but you can mess them up. I'm thinking of playing Gloomhaven. I've been playing a lot of Gloomhaven digital, which is actually a great adaptation, and there's this berserker that he hits stronger when he's at his weakest health, so you're encouraged to juggle, and it's high risk, high reward. If you can manage to keep him at 1 hit point, you're just destroying everything, but you're at 1 hit point. And so there's kind of similar thing we wanted to do with someone like the Occultist there, which is not one of the starting 4. It's sort of an opt-in. You have to unlock him, and then it takes a little more expertise. So I think but to me, he was one of the funnest and most interesting ones, and I was really happy with what James created there, and I think thematically works super well for Darkest Dungeon, because it's the whole game, first game and second game to some degree, are about always treading that edge of almost on the verge of complete and utter failure. And so mechanically we wanted to capture that, and the Cultist was a very good hero to do that with.
Absolutely. All right. So another popular question we're having on both Discord and the Steam chat centers around a character that was a permanent addition in the first game, but is now just a temporary hero. So
Talking about the caretaker.
yes, of course.
Yes, definitely.
So the question being, why did you choose to make the bounty hunter a temporary hero instead of a permanent one like in the first game?
So the question is really, why did we make the best possible choice? That's
Obviously.
what the question is driving at, and I'm happy to answer that. Because it's really cool.
Yeah.
Because the way I think about the heroes is they're like low fantasy X-Men. Okay, they all have their origin story. They have a costume. It's gritty and grimy and imperfect, but at the same time, like there's a lot of comic book influence, in their designs, and you need the broody silent type. And I think a mistake that gets made a lot of times is people love the broody silent type. They want to learn more about the broody silent type, and so they get fed. All the mysteries go away, and suddenly you don't care as much anymore. And I'm sorry, but the Book of Boba Fett was awful, and it answered every question I never had about Boba Fett, and just such a disappointment. And so the bounty hunter for me is kind of this Boba Fett Batman kind of mashup type, and he's a professional and meant to be ruthless. And how best to express that mechanically is to make him more powerful and more badass than everybody else, but you don't get him for very long, and he doesn't care about you. And I think that really, it makes that character shine, and I think the mechanical, like the way you acquire him in game and the fact that it's like a fleeting resource, makes him kind of special, transient. The rarity kind of creates a little bit more excitement. And I understand that, you want to settle in and have a full kit, but it was a deliberate decision that we made to really enhance his identity and his role in the game. So I don't know. I think it was a cool decision. I understand some people were less happy about it, but I think it's like it was the neatest way we could express who he really is without, I don't want to know the bounty hunter's backstory. I don't want to know what he looks like underneath the mask. I think it's just way more impactful to kind of keep a lot of the veil up in that case.
We feel like some of the success of Darkest Dungeon was because we were unafraid to take creative risks and also play around mechanically. And I think this is one of those cases where it's both together. Like everything you just talked about is really cool with the story and why and how he might be treated differently. But then mechanically we got to do something cool, which is like, what if you had this like, I guess we even use the analogy of going back to like Doom or something. You get the BFG, you get this like really powerful gun that you have 10 shots with. Like you can't run the whole game with it. And so we wanted to play with that. What if you could hire this hero? Now it's a choice. And the way it works, so the demo doesn't feature this, but the game has this full-featured hub called the Altar of Hope. It's kind of like the Hamlet of DD2, if you will. And it's persistent upgrades, and those sorts of things. And so you have to hire the bounty hunter out of the same currency that you would get to spend at the altar at the end of the run. So there's a cost as well. And I think that like I was alluding to earlier with, say, balance with the heroes, is there's a danger you can fall into a game where everything has the same tone. It's like listening to a song that doesn't have slow parts or loud parts. It's just all the same, or a movie full of car chases. And I think like sometimes you don't know when you're going to find those really cool things without experimenting. And we've always wanted to, we never wanted to be afraid to experiment. Like on DD1, our first DLC was the Crimson Court, which is this insanely broad, crazy, adds difficulty, like infection mechanic, but very cool, I think. And then we decided to go small, and then we decided to get weird again with Color of Madness as this like endless horde mode. And I think that goes to show our general approach to creative, features, which is we want to have fun making stuff, and so we like to try things. And I there's a dozen other or 11 other heroes by the time we launch 1.0, and there will be more after that, that work exactly like the other heroes. And so the bounty hunter is a chance to try something different.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think the temporary hero thing's pretty cool. Do you have any ideas?
Oh, wait.
Ooh.
Also, he's not temporary. He's in the game all the time.
Oh, sorry.
You just only get to use him.
Is like
I'm being pedantic.
Temporary.
but it's not like he only shows up, like on Tuesdays in the build or something. But anyway, sorry.
Once a year, the bounty hunter will appear. Yeah. Do you have plans to have any other heroes like the bounty hunter in the game? Someone you might hire?
We have no plans because that's his space.
That's his thing.
If everybody, it's kind of the same thing that you're saying. If you can hire everybody, then now the bounty hunter isn't special. So I think, we're internally like big fans of the hero backstories, and it's a considerable amount of effort to do the 5-part, like writing the story, crafting and designing the fights, doing all the like it's a big commitment to do those heroes. But we really like having that kind of meat on the bone, so to speak. Then I think it's important, and it makes them feel really nice and robust, and it sets the bounty hunter aside. So I wouldn't want to start making, here's a DLC with like 6 hireable heroes, and now we've gone against everything that made the bounty hunter feel like this rocket launcher that you only get for a limited time. So our plans for additional heroes are full featured.
Yeah, I think though the thing is, if we think a hero deserves a mechanic unique to them,
we'll do it.
Not just in terms of their skill kit, but how they interact with the game, and we get excited about, like, that remains on the table. But I think specifically the hiring, like the bounty hunter is so thematically, we're not also probably going to drop a mercenary and a hired gun and whatever.
Could we do a Houndmaster where your whole party is just dogs? Maybe we could.
Maybe, yeah. So I think we retain, we want to leave open the door to doing weird stuff with the heroes, but
yes,
that ground is already tread.
Fair enough.
Trodden
upon.
I don't
know. All right, switching gears back over to art. What was it like to transfer from 2D to 3D art, and were there any unforeseen complications or glaring pros and cons with this method?
Who asked this question?
Tranquil, also.
Okay. So he got the twofer after all.
Oh, he did. Well done, or they. Well done.
He got it in there.
I don't know how many of you have drawn like everything for a game. I don't know how many people out there have done that. It's a lot of work, and it was very intense. And I was looking forward to adopting a workflow that didn't have it so like Chris-centric, I think. It was great. We brought Trudy Castle on to augment our fledgling art team, early on for the DLCs to Darkest Dungeon 1. But I naively thought that going, with 3D meant we could do more with the heroes, and it wouldn't result in quite so much work on me, selfishly. And it is not the reality that I had in mind. It's a lot of work. We have an incredible team all the way from our VFX. I mean, I want to shout out the team, but maybe we'll do it at the end or something. But I want to make sure everybody gets their name on the stream. But we've got a great VFX artist, fantastic animation director, tech director. It's a great modeling team. So there's no, glaring holes in our production pipeline when it comes to the characters, and I'm very happy with the results. But it is a ton of work. The reason why I felt it was important to do it, though, was that I felt it would be arrogant to rely on the wow factor of just doing the same thing that we had already done the first time. And it's a lifetime source of like genuine. It means a lot that we made a successful game based on all this drawing that I did. That was like something in my career I never thought I would ever have that. But I feel like it would be arrogant to just say, well, I'll just do that again and it'll be twice as good and everyone will freak out a second time. So we felt it was important to change up how we're presenting, to try to give Darkest Dungeon 2 its own look within the kind of like art values of the first game, and then see how far some of these other amazing contributors could take those values and really push them. So our animator or animation director Yusuf has put so much personality into the heroes that we just couldn't do with the 2D art. There's just so much more to look at, and it still remains impactful. We actually experimented early on with doing like the impact slow motion. So when you cut to to the impact of a skill. We would like drift the characters because we thought like that would add even more kind of texture to those moments. But it turns out it sucked. And it was the best thing to do was to just go with the still frame. So that was kind of an interesting takeaway. But then Tom, our VFX artist, and Yusuf collaborated really intensely and really developed the anticipation and the follow through coming in and out of those moves. And it's very, very elegant. And I think really amps up the feeling of just a simple mouse click. So I think it's paid off. It was a big transition. It was a lot of work. It remains a lot of work, but I think we managed to put something together that's like a faithful kind of evolution of the first game, and I'm quite proud of it. I think it looks great.
Is it? I don't know if we can tease on this, but it also. So what he was alluding to at the beginning there is literally, Chris had to draw everything that went in Darkest Dungeon 1 for a long time. And so one of the challenging things is like if you want to put a different hat on Dismas, like it's like going back to the start and having to redraw everything. And the advantage of some 3D stuff is there is the possibility of outfit changes and, various things. I don't know if you want to, are we hinting anything or no?
I mean, we have, yeah, why not? One thing we'd really like to do that we're working on internally is like weapon skins, so that you can find and unlock and then see different gear kits for heroes. It's been we're working through the process of making their origin skins playable in the main game. That will not be a part of the 1.0 launch, just to be clear, but it will come afterwards for sure. So yeah, we have a little bit more flexibility and we can grow that capacity. I think our focus right now is on getting the game in the best state we possibly can and shipping the 1.0, but our development doesn't stop at that point. Like we don't just all go on holiday. We're going to, if you follow Darkest Dungeon 1's development, we had a lot of free updates, a lot of quality of life improvements, a lot of features that got added post 1.0 for free. Town events, Radiant mode came with new enemies, all sorts of stuff like that. So our development philosophy hasn't changed. It hasn't modernized in any way in the last 10 years. But we look forward to doing more of that stuff. So trickling in new content, making more things accessible. It's maybe an interesting segue to the Make-A-Wish thing, but we can touch on that in a minute. But we're looking forward to adding more stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really driven, we can't thank you enough for the fact that the reason we were able to do that on DD1 is because the game found an audience, which, it's just never something we're ever going to take for granted. And, so I think that the life cycle of DD2 is going to be related to that too. But, we had a lot of success and we really enjoyed on DD1 doing a mix of free updates and then eventually some paid DLC. And that worked great. I mean, our studio we're not trend chasers. Like we're not doing free to play. We're not doing, battle passes. We're not doing all these things. We kind of like making and selling, in the way that's just been around a long time, which is kind of like delivering you something that you buy, you own, and then ideally if the game finds an audience, then making more content, some of which might be paid, but what you're getting, and we've always tried to err on the side of value, but ultimately, the reason we were able to do that is because there was an audience. And so I think we've got a lot of stuff planned for 1.0 that, we'll hint at some of the things that are going to go in. And then there's a few things that just naturally fall post 1.0. And DD1 was the same way. And it's kind of hard to remember, sometimes because the game's been out now, 7? We just had the 7-year.
Birthday.
And that's a full release, right? That was the 7.
Yeah.
So, but there's a fair amount of stuff, that we added after 1.0. And so 1.0, is not meant to signify finality. It's just kind of a line in the sand where we say, hey, the base experience is complete. But I think, in this day and age, one of the coolest parts about the way games are distributed and sold is that you are able to continue supporting them. I think there's been some great examples of games that have leaned in hard on that, like No Man's Sky or whatever. So we can sort of adopt a bit of a living approach, even though our business model is still, you buy the game and you own it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Making the DLC was so fun. It was a lot of fun to just do all those different wild experiments we were talking about before, and it felt really validating to know that there were people out there who were looking forward to it, consuming it, high scoring it, that kind of thing. So it was that was a really great period of development because it felt like the anxiety and the raw terror of launching the 1.0 had kind of been assuaged a little, so
Right.
you could just
You get to play with your toys a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I played more Darkest Dungeon after we shipped Darkest Dungeon than I did while we were making Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah, and like that's a good point. I think like Crimson Court, I think Crimson Court and Color of Madness are similar in this regard, where we get to just get wild,
Yeah.
because we had already delivered like the core experience, and by that time you've also developed a lot of understanding of how your own game works. Your technology is finally at its peak in terms of all the tools internally, and so then it's like, when we, the bosses on Crimson Court get weird, and we were only able to do that because we had built up this library of like internal.
It's
tech.
funny to think like DD1 launched. It was like 3 regions. It was
Mm-hmm.
Necromancer, Swine, and why am I blanking now?
Was the hag in that
Yeah.
at the beginning?
Yeah.
I can't even
The hag.
remember.
Yeah, 'cause
the
it's
wheel.
mechanic.
So okay.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. That was the early access launch.
Yeah,
It's kinda crazy.
and you can see our own evolution, right? The ruins, it's skeletons, which is there's nothing bad about that. Like the core.
No one has ever put skeletons in a game before we did.
Yeah, right.
Let's go on record.
But
with that.
it's not super left of center, right? Other than the Bone Courtier, which I think was a nice little skeleton
was a
addition
nice-
that we did.
But yeah, you're right. You can see our identity grew.
Yeah.
We started with a Crusader and a Vestal, which are like pretty run of the mill, and then by the end of it, we've got a Cultist and lepers. And
Yeah,
I'm proud that we're the only game that features leprosy in a positive way.
He's
Leprosy
arguably,
gets a bad rap.
arguably the only character who's actually not.
He's the only
flawed.
good guy. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I like that. So, like, kind of going back to the bounty hunter thing, the leper is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. He's like kind of enlightened. He knows he's dying. He's at peace with it. And some people on our Discord have pointed out, like, when you do these backstory things, they're all kind of looking sad and into the blue area with a little bit of a rim light of gold. And he's the only one who's facing into the light, and that was on purpose because he's the antithesis of some of the more troubled
That's
cast
deep,
members.
man.
I try to be a
Facing
little
into the
deep.
light.
I try to be a little deep.
Are you a poet, Chris?
I wouldn't go that far.
The leper is a poet, or at least an appreciator of poetry.
I went to a poetry reading in university, and I had to leave because I was laughing. It
Oh,
was,
no.
It was so earnest. I couldn't do it.
Were you wearing exactly what I'm wearing right now?
The poet
Because
was.
I look like I should be at a poetry reading.
Yeah,
You do.
At least you don't have a pillar for that.
Start snapping.
Okay, well, what's else?
Yeah,
what else does
we're-
Tranquil
What
want to know?
else? Well, okay, this is the Tranquil show, apparently.
Yeah.
No. Well, I do have some breaking news from James.
Is this the answer? Okay.
Yes, going back to the question of the hardest characters to update. He
Okay.
says, first off,
Breaking news.
breaking news. News flash. Jester, because we not only had to give him new skills that swing a bunch of his old skills away from their constant spam nature, his kit was a lot like he was a lot of
True.
rework.
That's
And
a
we
good
also
point.
reworked the Jester like 4 times.
Yeah.
On DD1.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a hard one.
Let's move on.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, we'll put a pin in that, and when the balance question comes up, I think we can revisit some of that, because
absolutely.
it does go to illustrate how we approach those things. And okay, that's good to know.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. He's given the leper a close second as well for being the inaccurate guy in a game without inaccuracy.
Oh right, yes,
That's fair.
that actually is good. But he did great on that. I think it still captures, exactly like what we're going for with the. Why is the leper the best of everything? I don't know. He's just very cool. He's
the
one of
best.
our favorites. He's one, like, we have different, like, maybe official favorites, but I think probably both of our second favorite might be the leper.
Maybe.
I don't know. Anyway, we digress.
We digress.
Thank you for that, James.
Thank you, James, wherever you are.
James in the sky. Or
Yes.
40 feet that way.
All right, so moving into some questions on development from Loyal Signaran. What would you say is your biggest lesson from Darkest Dungeon 1 that has helped with the development of Darkest Dungeon 2?
These are the hard-hitting ones.
I know, I love it.
The biggest lesson we learned from DD1 into DD2, I think there's 2 things. One of them is a fun one. Let the theme lead first when it comes to design. You want to make a game about a journey, you want, like, let's talk about road trips, that kind of thing, and then let the mechanics come from that. And the other one is have a private test group so that you don't, put corpses in a game one day and everyone gets mad at you. That was a big learning, and we've embrace that.
To be clear, the corpses would still stay, but we would have, it's like buying a goldfish from the store. You don't just drop them into, water that's 20 degrees different.
Yeah.
We would roll it out, sort of build some understanding.
If the players were frogs, we would boil them more slowly.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think having a little bit more care and sensitivity to
the way we roll things out
was like a big lesson for sure, and that's something that like our producer John has really championed. And we have a really wonderful group of private testers that we work with, and they're just community members, and we've learned countless lessons from them, and just gotten a lot of just raw kind of guidance. And they're actually really great because our approach to looking at that stuff, as a quick tangent, is like, where there's smoke, there's probably fire, but when people who are having a problem suggest a solution, a lot of times the solution is really like shopping in the grocery store when you're hungry. You just end up with a cart full of Miss Vicky's chips. But it's really great to know where the smoke is, Canadian reference, where the smoke is billowing out of, So if there's a lot of dissatisfaction around an area, we ask ourselves, okay, well, really what's going on here. And I think that we've been really well served by this group of people. And then, of course, our experimental branch on DD2 is publicly available. So that's the next stage that we usually take things to. And that's great because we get a lot of opinions in the wild.
Like we have a lot more process on this game, but in a way that doesn't hamper development. It enhances it. And the private test group he's talking about, like, they're unsung heroes because we all have them under NDA where they can't talk about the things we try. So sometimes we drop things in there and go, oops, okay, well, let's all forget that happened. But most of the time they're helping shape. And I think on DD1, like, there's an element to DD1 where we got really lucky. Like we called a lot of shots or threw a lot of Hail Marys and they landed, And I think that we had more resources, we had a bit more time, and in doing so, we were able to have a bit more process on this, where we're able to try things out and refine. And so I think that, by the time things run out or roll out to the public, they've already been through sort of that initial phase of like the worst bugs and these sorts of things where, nostalgia is nostalgia, but there were some times on DD1 where, I remember multiple times of shipping an update where we go the patch notes, this is now in the game, and then right away people are like, this doesn't work, and then we have to roll a patch out later and say,
we would hotfix
now this works,
this
headline feature of the entire update. Whereas I think on DD2, we try to be a little more careful there, but at the same time, we never want to get so careful that we're afraid to try big things, and that remains one of our ethos. But I think like we've given a fair amount of talks on DD1, and the theme part, I want to come back to what you said a minute ago, which is like Darkest Dungeon 1, I don't think is a game that could have been made if we had people above us determining what is good and what is not, if we had like a traditional big publisher back in the day, because too many things get whittled down by committee. And I think that Darkest Dungeon 1 succeeded because we leaned into that direction. We leaned into and for example, he said like how theme determines mechanic. The way we approach saving is exactly one of those things. Chris and I aren't like dogmatically people who think games should always autosave. It's just it had to be that way for Darkest Dungeon 1. It had to, for the stakes with the fear of losing a character, the permadeath had to matter. And so we try to let that lead, even when that means creative risks that may or may not be something that, if we sourced it to 1,000 people, like 90% would say yes. Like sometimes people don't know what they want until you do it, but we also have to take those risks. And I think that we got to this situation with Red Hook Studios by taking those risks, and so that's something that we've tried to carry forward into DD2, which is maybe one of the reasons why some people are surprised at like, what am I doing in a stagecoach or whatever? Yep. But that.
But it was the same. It was the same process. Like I guess we're off the question, but it was the same process of designing the second game, where if we want to make it feel different from the first game, and we both got enamored with this idea of a journey and a road trip. Well, you can't carry a lot. You're not out to get treasure, which is a huge trope of dungeon crawling. You want to go in, you want to get treasure and loot, you want to come back out. And I think that we had that loop working successfully in the first game. But if you're on a road trip and your ultimate death, it's a ride or die situation, you just don't have the same values. And so, the development kind of focus for us shook out of that. You know, we're not carrying gems, and we're not building ourselves into super warriors with better and better gear. We're hoping to scrounge and make use of what we find, you know, as we kind of try and hold our shit together and get to the end. So I swore on Steam. I actually told my wife I wasn't going to swear today, but
Oh,
just ruined that.
did you just swear?
I let out a little shit there.
Uh-oh.
There's another.
Okay.
They're piling up.
All right.
Where's the 7-second button?
All right. Well, continuing on with some harder questions, what would you say has been the biggest challenge with Darkest Dungeon 2 for the team?
There's no shortage of challenges.
Yeah, I mean,
I think a big challenge for us was just scaling up. Like, I think we have a fantastic group of people working on this game, and they're not hard to manage. It's not that, but it's a lot more communication. There's a lot more information that has to get passed around through more people. So just the the experience of working with a significantly larger group, and just it's less just kind of head down doing the work. Although Tyler and I both still are heads down doing work. So I think maybe that's one of the challenges, is trying to we found some success by virtue of working a certain way, and then as we move to a larger framework, neither one of us wants to stop actually contributing, art, design, numbers, writing, to the game itself. And then we also have this bigger network around us that we owe our best efforts to in that sense. So I think that's definitely something. Technology.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking so Darkest Dungeon 1 we built when we started, there was really a core team of 5, and then we sort of ballooned up to close to 10, Yeah. And Darkest Dungeon 2 now has about 25 people plus. That doesn't count, for example, our sound and music and Wayne June, voice actor, and some part-time contributors. But we have about 25 full-time people working on it, and so that's not a lot of people, considering how an Assassin's Creed probably takes 1,000 people or something crazy, or Destiny. But it's all relative, right? So going from doing a really core part of development with 5 people to sort of doing it with 20 just necessitates some changes. And it's interesting because Chris and I both worked at bigger companies where there was, you've worked at even bigger ones. But I've worked, on teams that were similar size or bigger than this. But it's different when you're starting to reinstitute that with your own studio that had started with a couple people. That's one of the challenges.
We kind of had to move out of it felt like a little bit like a clubhouse, and it was, we had to move kind of out of the clubhouse into a small business. I think, just intellectually, that was a bit of a transition for sure. COVID didn't help at all.
Yeah.
Not a fun time for anybody. Hard to run a business. I know a lot of games got delayed because of COVID, and the weird thing is, you don't even feel the loss of velocity in the moment. At first, early COVID, everybody's kind of shocked. Of course, you expect work to kind of taper a little bit. But everybody, got on with it, and we found that we were working pretty well remotely. But that said, when you look back, you're like, yeah, actually, we did lose a lot of time. And I think a lot of studios felt the same thing. It's there's a lot of overhead when you're not all in the same room, of making sure everybody's getting in the right places and communicating, and then that ends up taking up a greater proportion of your day. And maybe you just have an existential terror of the world slowly falling around you, but you're also trying to make a game about the world falling around you.
And you're making the sprawl, which is about people clawing their faces off in a tough pandemic.
Emotional balance for a few months there.
Yeah.
I'll shift now the question to the game specifically. Darkest Dungeon 1, when it launched into early access, like Chris said, we were kind of similar amount of content in terms of percent of maybe the game complete. But it's been a different journey in terms of DD1 during early access was more about filling out features and content, literally just junk, with a few exceptions of gameplay changes. But really, it was more about tuning and just adding the content. Whereas DD2, there's a few things that were okay, that didn't quite work the way we wanted to. And so one of the things that's been most interesting about the early access period on DD2, and quite honestly, I'm most proud of us as a group, is we've never been afraid to look at those hard questions of okay, this thing isn't doing the way we want. Like the relationship system is not landing the way that we want it to land. And so we spent a bunch of time, going back to ground zero on it and rebuilding it in terms of both conceptually, and then we ended up keeping a lot of things from it because we realized that a lot of things still could work, they just weren't working in the way that we had it in. So I think the DD2 early access journey, and this was made possible by the bigger team, has been, okay, there are a lot of people that are just making more content similar to DD1, but we've also like stripped some things down to the studs and rebuilt them, like the relationship system, or in the case like the Altar of Hope, the progression system, we always knew that we didn't have the final version of that in. Like at DD2 early access launch, there was a very thin progression system in. It was placeholder really. And so we've actually just built some like entirely new systems during early access of DD2, which I think is really fun from a development standpoint. But it is a bit like laying track while the train is running, that sort of analogy. But I think that has been a challenge, but also one of the most rewarding parts. And I'm personally very happy with a bunch of the changes that we have done. I think like anyone who's been, on Epic playing the game has probably seen a real increase of velocity the last 6 months with updates, probably starting with Trinkets, the Cultist, then Altar of Hope, and then into the relationships update. And so, it's been hard, but really satisfying at the same time.
Absolutely. So do you want to go a little more into the relationship system? I know that, as you mentioned, it's new. We've just pushed it into January.
January, right.
On retail. So
Yeah.
you want to go into that a little more, kind of let people know what's up?
Yeah, we agreed that it was too intrusive, I think. It was like, it was kind of getting in the way of like a smooth kind of combat experience. I think ultimately, I looked at it and I felt like this is like everybody has an affliction from DD1 and the Crimson Curse and something else, and they all have something to say all the time. And so, but we didn't want to, and we recognized that early on, but we didn't want to jump on it prematurely, and we wanted to really like take our time to think about how best to kind of reconceptualize this area of the game, which we felt like was important and interesting, but like you said, not necessarily doing its job. And so we kind of tried to apply the philosophy that we took with combat, which is, let's be a little bit chunkier with the increments. Let's try to make the thing either stands up and yells in your face or you don't see it. And let's try to kind of embrace a little bit more of a gamey quality, so that we treat each region as an individual kind of leg of a journey. And those kind of like priorities, when we got them down on paper, started to kind of take shape into what's in the live environment now. And we really liked the idea that the characters would hamper each other mechanically, by virtue of having a relationship, but this was something more strategic and tactical that you could try to work around, or just be forced sometimes to choose a suboptimal skill because you didn't want to trigger a negative effect, or just bite the bullet and do it because you really need that skill to fire off at that particular moment. And so we felt like enhancing the amount of strategic decision making around how the relationships were implemented in the game was definitely the move, and then trying to make them a little bit more clear, and basically saying, look, relationship system, we don't need you playing lead guitar. Like, we have a lead guitarist already, they're doing great. We need to put you on rhythm guitar a little bit more towards the back, because the sound is like too much right now. And so we kind of had to just figure out, it's a little bit of like orchestra conducting, and just try to get it in its proper place where it has something to say.
It's vital to the texture of the journey. It like we also maybe leaned in too hard on theme for the first version. Specifically, what I mean is, like, for example, we're like, if you're really in love, like sometimes you do crazy things that are irrational and jealous, and so there was the famous complaint of just like, why are they complaining all the time about me healing someone else, or the kill stealing was one of the worst. We had a thing where you kill a monster and then someone else is like, hey, that should have been my kill, and I think that was a case where there was, funny enough, a bug where that was happening like 10 times more frequently than it should have. So that's always fun when you ship a bug that colors the feeling of an entire community. But at the same time, it was kind of an unnecessary moment. So when we redid, we tried to make them more iconic. We're like, hey, look, if you're in love with this person, like we can skip some of the more complicated stuff.
I don't know,
like,
but if you've ever been in love, it's a mess. So the first iteration, we're like, yeah, this is cool. Like they get kind of weirdly jealous. They're passive aggressive. They will throw themselves in harm's way for you. I'm like, this is a little bit more accurate to a relationship between, But it turns out, then we dress it up with gold font and it looks positive. And you feel like, well, this should be giving me only benefits, and it's giving me off. Also,
it muddies
an incredibly accurate portrayal of love, but not a satisfying one to play.
To our significant others, hello. But yeah, and a lot of it felt like it was happening to you. And I think one thing
that's a good point.
Like in DD1, one of the very early decisions we made on stress was to show it as a meter, as a tangible gameplay thing that you could game. You're like, I'm at 9. If I hit 10. Well, back then it'd be 90. If I hit 100, I'm in trouble. And so we did a meter. And so sure, we did affinity meters in the first version of the relationships too. But the point being, some of the other stuff was almost too textural, is too like immersive. Yeah. And so one of the things we did was like, we exposed now, like when you play the relationship system, if you're about to do a skill and it's going to make someone else angry, like you see a little blue diamond. By the way, in this game, blue generally means bad. It's equivalent of the old red. Blue is the new red. Right? Yeah. And so we actually show it so you can make a gameplay decision, because here we built this, what I think is a pretty successful turn-based combat system, and we doubled down on it in DD2 by doing a bunch of, redesigning it. But then we have all these things happening. You do a thing and it happens to you and you just don't feel like you had control. And so we had to reintroduce some control. And so we found, though, that I guess like a real key part of this is we were willing to rebuild the system from scratch, throwing 100% of what we had before out. But every time we started conceptualizing it, we're like, no, we still need affinity. We still need, all these are mechanically and thematically solid in theory. We just didn't execute it right. And so we spent a bunch of time, I would say the first half of the year, having a lot of conversations about what we could do. And then finally, after we did the Altar of Hope, we were able to dig in and build it. And that was really satisfying to be able to drop that into test in November and December, and then get it out to the broader community in January. So for those of you that might be waiting for the game on Steam,
you were spared.
You didn't have to deal with that.
You didn't have to deal with
but
love.
You get all the you get all the benefits. So anyway, but that I think that was both scary, difficult, but we're really happy where it's landing now, and that's kind of like the DD2 early access in a nutshell. Maybe is like that process has been really important.
For sure. Okay, switching gears, we'll go back to that tuning question. So, what are Red Hook's systems for determining whether a character or their skills are balanced? What leads you to change a character or a skill?
So it first starts with just top-level goal, which is, like I was alluding to earlier, it's more important to have spikiness. Like we use the term spikiness all the time.
Yeah.
We don't start with the goal that every hero needs to be samey. In DD1, it was the same thing, where we kind of looked at the game. We're like, well, there's camping benefits, combat benefits, and et cetera. And we just want there to be a reason why you would use each hero, but it doesn't have to be equal. So I think that's a really important thing to start with. So when we go the theme first design, our first goal is just to make a hero that is super fun and interesting, and every skill has a place. It might be that you're like, wow, this character is great in this region, like super great in that region, but not as great in the others. Or there might be a character who's super versatile and is great in every region. So there's an example where I think if you start with this goal of just trying homogeneity, it's really bad. So, but the community becomes really important here. The reality is, like, I love to do a lot of spreadsheets. Or the other designers on the project, James and Eric, they love to do a lot of spreadsheets, but a spreadsheet will not tell you if something's fun. It can just help identify if you have like something's out of whack, but sometimes you want it to be out of whack. So what we really rely on is the community. This has been true of DD1, it's true of DD2, where if people aren't using a hero or they're just complaining about it a lot, usually there's something there. And so that's when
the smoke and fire thing again.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's just not working.
So you have to go back and be like, what we consider a failure would be if a hero is not being used, or even if, a skill is never being used. And we had lots of problems with this on DD1. I mean, there's so many skills that we, hook and slice, probably did 4 tries on, or the jester skills. And you can never achieve complete, perfection. Yeah. But I read something recently, which I can't remember the exact quote, but it was probably relating to either Overwatch balance or whatever. But it's important to look at these things as an evolving, living thing. I think there's a goal of if you got everyone balanced, if you finally achieved that, then they would be fine for eternity. But no, because the metas change. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually more fun and more dynamic to lean into that and just realize that metas will change. So you might perfectly balance a jester at this point, introduce a couple new items or trinkets, and all of a sudden something is horribly broken. And there's a lot of complexity in the game, and it's impossible to really see it all ahead of time. So that's where we just rely on the community, and our test groups. And so because it's too complex to try to believe that you could get it right in a vacuum.
Even success in that case would result in a roster of heroes that are essentially interchangeable, because they're each performant in the same ways across the same metrics, and that just isn't really indicative of kind of the values of the game, or it's not really, doesn't even sound fun, to be honest. It's nice to have an underpowered, allegedly underpowered character, really have some situational utility where you're like, wow, that's why I brought you. Great. And I think that's kind of cool. And I think, in Darkest Dungeon 2, choosing the environments that you're going to head into is a different proposition than choosing the type of dungeon you wanted in the first game, because you can't build a team for every dungeon. So you build a team at the start, and you sort of hope, okay, well, I really want to avoid the sprawl, this run, because I'm just not kitted out. These heroes are not going to go there, or be as effective there. And if you end up there, I think there's a lot of joy to be found in surviving that with a suboptimal team. And so those holes and crags and kind of pitfalls and the noise and grit that comes from a little bit of asymmetry makes for some more memorable moments than if everything was sanded smooth, which is impossible to do anyway. So it's kind of academic.
No, totally. And this is one advantage of a single player game also, just for clarity, is you can afford to do some of that, because maybe someone who doesn't totally know how to, for example, the Cultist, maybe someone who just hasn't learned how to manage his unchecked power, just might ignore him. And that's totally okay for us, actually, because we don't need every hero to be usable on the same amounts at every skill level either, or every level of knowledge, not even just so much skill, experience in the game, maybe, of just...
item pairing, trinket pairing can change a lot about how a hero works. And so someone may say, okay, well, this hero's trash, and then someone else swears by them because they have a particular set of ancillary buffs that they use to make that hero fulfill a certain role. And then I love seeing people argue, Malediction's trash, Malediction's amazing. And that, to me, that's a sign where we've got it in a good spot. When you have two people furious at each other on the internet over the same skill but from opposite perspectives, I'm like, that's probably a pretty good sign.
And also, I think there's two ways to look at balance issues. If, say, something's going on, everyone's like, you need the jester right now just to manage stress in the game. Period, you can't get by without it. Sure, there's a chance that, there's 3 different ways to approach that problem. You could try to nerf the jester. Of course, now you could try to reduce stress overall in the game, or you could try to provide other heroes that can do similar things. And so I think that's something we always try to keep in mind too, is our first reaction is not always to nerf. Sometimes it means, or if we know we're privy to the production pipeline, so we know what other heroes are coming. So sometimes there might be a thing where especially this is the case during early access, where you're oh yes, this hero has an outsized role right now because they're the only backline, whatever.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, hypothetically. But we know someone else is coming down the pipe, and so we're that's a temporary problem. So
it's a hypothetical problem.
It's a hypothetical problem that may or may not have announcements coming soon about. Perhaps even this week.
Shut up.
Quick, give me the muzzle.
You gotta just stop talking sometimes.
Get him out of here.
Wait, this is why I brought this.
Right, yeah, use that.
Perfect.
All right, Tyler, another question for you from Mr. McScary.
I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah.
It's about the token system. It's
okay.
So, from Mr. McScary on the Steam chat, how did the token mechanic come about for Darkest Dungeon 2?
I want to answer this.
Yeah, do it.
it.
I want to answer this.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Because we were sitting there in my basement talking about
Were we
this
on the
game.
very Pwong IKEA chair
No.
that launched DD1?
No, the playing was in my office in the other room. We were
Was
on
it?
it. We were on.
How do you
shitty
remember
couch.
what chairs were?
It was an important chair.
He's an artist. He's very visual.
We were sitting there and we were humming and hawing about different, approaches. And we're like, yeah, this road trip thing could be really cool, blah, blah. And Tyler was like, I just don't want to do the same combat here. I don't want to do it. And then we're like, look, there's got to, he's like, but I just don't know how much else we could do. It was like a little tantrum. And then he's like, okay, it's just so many little numbers. And out of that he went away and came back and he's like, I want to chunk it all up and we're going to use this token thing. And I thought it was a great idea then. And I think it's a great idea to this very day.
Is that just for the stream's benefit? Or?
I guess.
Yeah, so
No, it's awesome.
Specifically, like Chris and I, the combat is cool. Like Darkest Dungeon combat worked really well, and even when we started DD1, like we were there, I had some concern. I'm like, is there enough mechanical depth? Meanwhile, fast forward a game that sells 6 million
10
copies
years.
and multiple DLCs,
Yeah.
and we were still coming out with new things. So that was answered. But yes, then we were like, oh, let's do this again. We talked about like throwing out the combat system, but that was one of the things where like, no, this is like such a great anchor. It works. We'll
It wouldn't be
dress it
Darkest
up.
Dungeon without the combat system.
Yeah.
Unless it was an MMO, which
Yeah.
we haven't started development.
There was like a, at least related to me by someone who used to work with Sid Meier, that there's this rule of thirds that he adopted when sequeling Civilization, which is like keep 1/3 of what worked before, modify 1/3 of the previous stuff, and then introduce 1/3 new. Now that's not to say that's like what we were thinking about when we did this, but I think you can look at DD2 and say combat's one of those things that we carried forward, but we did choose to modify it. So I guess it falls in that second third. And specifically, over the course of DD's development in DLC, there became certain balance issues and also just like fiddly things that, a decision you made 5 years ago determines what you still have to work within the confines of today. And I had never worked on a sequel before. This was like a really cool, rare opportunity.
Yep.
And similar to what I was just talking about with the relationship system, it's really neat to be able to go back to the whiteboard and be like, the world's our oyster. We could do anything. What do we want to do? And the combat was one of those cases we really wanted to carry it forward. But like accuracy over the course of, for example, this is just one example. Over the course of tuning Darkest Dungeon 1 and all the DLCs, gradually accuracy just went up, and up as a baseline because it's just no fun to miss. We were playing like some CCGs. I think like CCGs are a great inspiration for mechanical chunkiness and clarity because generally speaking, CCGs, especially that inspire from the tabletop variety, they don't do well with uncertainty. It's not a fun game if you're like, play this monster, now roll 2 dice, and it's not D&D, right? Like D&D is great for D&D, but a CCG needs to be mechanically resolved clearly. And so I was like trying to think a lot about like how to take those kind of mechanics. Like I always say the mechanic of taunt in a CCG is like one of those really clear ones. You're like, you have to attack that creature. There's no like you might have to 88% of the time. Mm-hmm. And also when you do damage, you do damage. It's not about, it's like I did 3 damage. He has a defense of 2. I killed that monster. And so I was really interested in mechanically exploring how to kind of take that approach, but layer it onto our existing framework. And so that's
too late. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I think too, just like as not the numbers designer, it's just more compelling and interesting to be like, I have 25% or 50% is the coin toss, or this is definitely going to happen, and it just cuts down on a lot of like tooltip math that's not where we're getting our fun from. It's like, get your calculators out. It's time to play Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah, your decisions don't meaningfully change if you're sitting there and you have an 88% chance to proc versus an 86. Like it's not really going to actually affect.
And
your,
those boosts
your
aren't
decisions.
like, oh, this trinket gives you plus 2%. Like, okay. I mean, that's usually to me. I played a bunch of like back before I had children. I could play
Video games?
Video games and MMOs and stuff. And, usually that stuff is like at the end game where you're grinding raids and you're like, okay, you can eke out another 2%. You're like, oh, that's huge because you're already at like 99.9 or whatever it is of the overall power curve. So in that case, it makes sense. But in the meat proper of the game where you're just experiencing, the pure campaign, getting a super ultra rare trinket that gives you like 1%, 2%, it just does, it falls flat. The gold border can't alone make you feel good about it.
Yeah, and visually it's not as interesting. And so the beauty, well, I say beauty because this was an experiment. This was a hypothesis. We actually built this whole token system. And I remember specifically for months and months going like, we need to ascertain whether this is working because we're about to reach a point where there's not time to redesign if we have to. Yeah. And but visually it's really cool because, like, let's go back to the Occultist again, unchecked power. He now acquires a token. It's visual. You can see it. And once you know what that token does, you can just see it and you don't have to search a tooltip and be like, and so I think we've been able to, every time we come up with kind of a new mechanic, usually it's pretty easy to layer a token on it. And so accuracy we did away with, but now we have the concept of blind and dodge, but it's simpler. You just know that unless you see a blind or a dodge, it's going to hit. And I think that creates a really interesting space. Like, granted, we got a lot of mileage out of missing in DD1 where, like, the boss is down to 1 hit point, you're on your last hero, and you swing, you're like, please God, hit. But we still can have those moments here because the boss could have a dodge token, and but the beauty is you can make certain strategic choices with more clarity, and it's just chunky. We're always saying chunky, like every time Chris
chunky
and I are
spiky.
Chunky and spiky, and so I think the token system was an attempt to make a version 2.0 of a combat system that worked really well, but why can't we improve it? So I mean we hope, and I mean the community I guess will let us know that Darkest Dungeon 2 combat is just as fun as DD1, but even more refined, even more interesting, even more strategic, and also less just cluttered.
Absolutely. All right, moving on. Well, we have 3 months now until launch, so...
Wait.
Oh,
February,
three,
March.
Oh my
3?
God, it's 3 months in a
I'm
day.
sorry.
Okay.
Was I not supposed to say?
We're wasting our time on this friggin' stream. We should be working.
Back to
Sorry,
the desks.
I feel like May still sounds like a long way away,
it's
but
not.
when you say
no,
it,
it's...
Take another drink.
She's coming. Are you able to share any plans for updates coming between now and May 8th?
Let's do that.
I'm going to stop being the leaker. You be the leaker.
Let's share some plans. So we talked about the relationship system and just how production on Darkest Dungeon 2 has been, a little bit more about taking a second look and really gutting out and trying to improve these bigger systems. And I think one of the areas where we're definitely getting the message that it's kind of falling short is on the traversal. I hesitate to call it driving because it implies that although I'm very, very good at Mario Kart, we're not trying to make a Mario Kart game. The only person who's better than me at Mario Kart is Kier, who's over there. But he's an awful troll and no fun to play with.
He has been known to get near the finish line, turn around just to shell you.
But yeah, so we don't want to introduce. We're a strategy tactics game. We're not an action game. Traversal driving is meant to evoke the walking in Darkest Dungeon 1, but there isn't enough happening on the roads to create the same sort of like possibility space. And I think the reason why it was more fun maybe to hold the right arrow and wait for almost the exact same amount of time as it is to hold the forward arrow and wait for the same amount of time is that things might happen. And there's something very compelling about the fear of a trap or the opportunity of a curio or what have you. And so we're taking a look at driving in an upcoming milestone. We're not adding, responsiveness or drifts or boosts. We've shortened the distance between nodes as much as our procedural generation will allow, and we've increased the stagecoach speed as much as our physics will allow. But what we can do, and what we're planning on doing, is introducing conditions on the actual chunks of road. So you're going to have to scout these things. There will be traps. There will be, poor driving condition, which will take its toll on your coach. If your route is unscouted, you don't know what's ahead of you. And so we're looking at broadening the kind of possibility space and increasing the sort of like coach-esque simulation portion lightly. We don't, again, it can't play lead guitar, but it needs a slightly bigger role in our strategic and tactical space. So what that really looks like is, you're going to have, I don't want to like outline the whole thing, but you're going to have to invest a little bit more in the stagecoach to keep it maintained. And while out on the road, you're going to be judging the route is almost as important as the node you're hoping to get to. And we're hoping that it puts you in a position where you may even have to forego going to a node that you feel like would be best for you because your coach isn't equipped for that leg of that section of road up ahead. So I think it's very exciting. I know our environment team of Marielle and Trudy and Nina have been working really hard on bringing that and pets to the fore for this upcoming update. And I think that's going to be really cool.
Yeah, and it plays off of existing systems too. Like we have stagecoach upgrades, and I love the tension that comes from really hard decisions about how to equip your stagecoach. And I think that, for example, the 1.0 version that has all this in there, finally allows us to take advantage of all those choices where you're like, I could have something that really helps me perhaps make combat items. I could have something that helps me scout. I could have something, and those are like hard decisions. And I think this, enhancing some of the driving mechanics allows us to provide some additional choice and interesting strategies, synergies there too. So
it's like kind of how
itemization ties into it.
Yeah, for sure. So there's going to be more loot you can get, more stagecoach upgrades, quirks for heroes that relate to this traversal kind of changes. And it's basically the same approach that we took with the relationship system, where we felt like, how can we enhance player kind of agency and strategic thinking, and not just have it be something that's quite so passive. So it's not going to be an action experience at all. Like, I just want to set expectations.
We look forward to your mods that turn it into.
You can turn it into Darkest Cart, yeah, for sure. And that sounds like a great game. Yeah. I would buy that game on Steam. I would wish list it now, much like you can wish list Darkest Dungeon 2.
Right.
But yeah, we're excited about it because I think it just elevates the level of thought and preparedness that goes in, and we really wanted the coach to be a bit of a character. Obviously not, on par with the heroes themselves, but we wanted to be something that you gave a little bit more thought to, and so we're looking to make that happen.
Well, and that goes to like the core of, so Darkest Dungeon 2, for those of you that haven't played it yet, you're driving this coach and essentially traversing a node map where you're choosing destinations, which could be analogous to in DD1 where you're kind of
rooms.
in the dungeon. You're like, well, this is a courier room and this is a battle room. But like a question we've been asked before is like, well, why not just have a node map? Why not just click on the node? Well, what we like to do at Red Hook, and I think one of the reasons DD1 succeeded is, we lean in hard on the immersiveness. And I think like the coach is a good example of that, where in driving, you get to see the world, you get to feel it, you get to hear it, you get to have Wayne talking to you, you get to have characters barking, and now just maybe the bit that's been missing is just enough mechanical hooks as well. But like that, we want you to also have that beat in between the nodes. This is something you've talked about a lot, but quite frankly, like sure, from a purely mechanical experience, clicking the node is faster. But we actually want you to inhabit the world for a moment, and we want you to have to think about this and have a little bit of dread and anticipate what's up ahead and get to know the characters better. And
it was the same reason that, like, when we first designed Darkest Dungeon, the initial game, the conventional wisdom was that if you're going to do a dungeon crawling tactics game, you got to do it top down or ISO. But that's a God's eye view perspective, and that implies that you are above and safe from the events that are unfolding in front of you as a player. And we wanted to break down that barrier. And we had to pay the price. And the price was you always move left to right. Even if you're going north, going south, going east, going west, you always move left to right. And that's a little weird. And when people would first play the game, they're like, huh. And they'd get over it, and it just became one of the idiosyncrasies of Darkest Dungeon. You always move left to right. But it was important to get the camera down in the muck next to the heroes so that you, the player, don't feel like you can lord over, what's happening to these little peons. And it's the same philosophy with driving. We want you in the world. We want you in that space, not just sort of hopping from node to node through a menu, which, would be more expedient perhaps, but I think far less of an experience. And I think having those quiet beats in between the decisions you make at nodes is important. And so we're very bullish or optimistic that a touch more strategy in terms of traversal will really complete the desired experience that we want people to have. So we're looking forward to releasing that prior to 1.0. So that'll be an early access update. Not our next update, but it's coming. It's being worked on right now, but like here, right over there.
Yeah, I hear typing. And also related to that is, I guess we could tease this too, it's just a small thing, but quality of life, like we're going to add mouse controls, for the driving, things like that, because the driving isn't meant to be a challenge of control. It's a moment in the game, decision making, and so we will continue to do quality of life stuff there, and and I guess like going back to the question of like what we have planned, we have an update coming soon that I guess stay tuned for more news. You won't have to wait long.
Take a drink.
Sip. And every
just,
time I
just cool it.
Every time I
You've had a lot to say. Just
it's a weird drinking game where every time I almost give this away, I have to take a shot. But so that update, then the driving update, and then we're saving everything else for the actual 1.0 because we need a good period of about 6 weeks before launch where we can just not have to worry about managing builds and all that stuff, and we're just packing into the 1.0.
And I mean, something I think it's worth mentioning is, I see not just related to our game or Darkest Dungeon 2 or, any other game out there. I'm on a few of these subreddits. Game teams work, every department is working, kind of with a different set of priorities. We rally around a milestone, but work on, the Altar of Hope, which launched in the summer, was undertaken in the spring. People broke ground on it. There are people completing the last of the content, the character content, the boss content, now. And it will be completed well in time, but we're just not prepared to release it. It needs to go through, polish, pass, visual effects, that kind of thing. I have sent the last of the script off to Wayne June for acting. So there is more that is done than is shown externally, and our milestone releases are not representative of the amount of work that's completed internally. And I understand why, if you're not in, up on game development or in the industry, that might be kind of a weird thing to wrap your head around. But teams have different specialties, and they work at their own schedules that, coalesce around milestones. But and I only bring it up just as a point of interest. And so, we're 3 months out, but it's not like we haven't started the fourth confession boss or the final ultimate boss or any of these things. They're underway and in hand. So.
And maybe this is I want to make sure we get this on stream, so I'm just going to jump to this, which is probably one of the questions. But we had earlier said about post 1.0. So yeah, there's some things that will come post 1.0 too. Specifically, can I get into the modding support?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you whispered it now.
It's really hard once you say something in camera. But I think that's a good example where. So DD1, the modding community has been huge.
It's amazing.
For the life cycle of the game.
Everything from garter belts on the Grave Robber to complete game overhauls, whatever you want is in the Steam workshop.
Exactly.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and so one question we get asked a fair amount is, what is our approach to modding on DD2? And I would say it's the same as DD1, which is we definitely want to encourage it. We definitely want to support it. But DD1, we didn't fully support modding through sharing more information, sharing some actual tools, and eventually, for example, I shared the actual monster and hero spreadsheets, that I was using to make them. But that came after.
Magnanimous act, by the way.
It's really,
truly.
What a quality person. But
this guy, take a drink. Yeah, you deserve it. Sharing a spreadsheet like that.
Look, get in here, join me. We want to support it. But you just have to understand that we have to get the game out first. now another, question is, for example, on DD1, you could draw something in 2D and bring it into the game, and DD2 has a bit more complexity there, but we have some tricks up our sleeve, perhaps, because there's a lot of people on the team who really are passionate about it. Our animation director is incredibly passionate. Yusuf Mapar is incredibly passionate about making sure that we support modding in the right way, and but I think modding is one of those examples that goes to show that we can both completely support this and be into it, but there's just a time when that'll happen, and that 1.0 again is not the end of Darkest Dungeon 2. In some ways, it's the beginning of its full life cycle. So those things won't be coming before, but they'll be coming after, and there will be some other like actual gameplay features that will come after too.
Absolutely.
Specifically, like no, this is a good one. We've talked about this one. Like one of the things we're asked a lot about is like difficulty modes or like things like that. Mm-hmm. And in Darkest Dungeon 1 we did Radiant mode, which was the easier, less grindy update, and that was done as a free update after. So we're always going to be looking at things like that too, of like if we can service more of the community in a long-term way, like we're always willing to look at those things. So
yeah.
I'm sorry, was that okay?
No, that was great.
Okay.
Yeah. I think what Tyler was trying to say is that we recognize the value of modding. It's been awesome for us, and we want to honor the community and their contributors by making sure that DD2 is ultimately as moddable as we can make it, but we have to finish it first. Mm-hmm. That's our primary responsibility, I think, as developers.
For sure. Going back to one thing that you briefly mentioned there, Chris, you mentioned pets. Now, I know pets have come up quite a bit on Discord and Steam. I Has Free Candy on Steam wants to know, when the pets are finally implemented, will they finally being the operative word?
No, that's fine. Yep.
Yeah.
We have teased them for a while.
Candy wants the candy. I get it.
When the pets are implemented, will they serve a functional purpose, or will they just be cosmetic?
They will definitely have a functional mechanical purpose. They are like a stagecoach trinket, I guess, in a sense. Their effects are random and far-reaching, and we tried to make sure that we came up with some kind of wacky stuff.
I'm being quiet because I leak too much, so I'm enjoying this.
All right. Well, you want to
tell us about the pets.
Well, okay. So So one of the interesting things about pets, not interesting. One of the really cool and special parts of this game development is watching our sub teams come together and make really great content. So one of the coolest things about the pets is I had very little to do with them. This is my favorite. It's not. I like having to do with everything, but.
This is true.
Between Trudy and Nina and Mariel and Eric, we've come up with this. You can have a baby shambler. It's very adorable. It's right on the edge. It's as cute as we're getting.
Yeah.
Full stop. So there's like a little bit of a line. We stop there at baby shambler. But you can put them in your coach. They will show up on the outside of the coach in little cute cages that are still appropriately gothic. And I think it was really marvelous, and that small little feature I think really carries a lot of like passion from the people who directly authored all that content. So that'll be part of our driving update.
No, big question: are the pets pettable?
They're clickable.
Ooh.
You can mouse over them for a tooltip.
Much
like a normal pet.
Everyone loves a tooltip.
Yeah.
Can you send regards?
You can press F. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, pettable. Yeah, I know it's a meme.
It's not it's not a Tamagotchi, but
you want to pet a shambler? They're not it's not a simulator. It's not a pet simulator. We're not tacking a simulator onto it. But it's a neat, flavorful kind of way of acquiring and equipping, something that'll modify your play experience as you go.
And we're getting weird with the effects in a good way, which is to say, so the pets have been on the roadmap for a long time, and I think that's probably where the finally part of the question came from. But we kept delaying it, because we were busy building other systems. And one of the benefits of finally having locked in, all the other systems, the altar, the relationship 2.0.
Trinket overhaul.
Trinket overhaul. Is that now we get to make pets in a more interesting way than we would have if we did them a year ago. And so, the way we're approaching it is you can equip a pet for your journey. They'll be unlocked at the altar. And the pet will have significant strategic relevance to your party comp, the way what items you're trying to get, and then maybe even where you're going in the journey. So we want it to be weird and interesting, and not just like, this pet gives everyone plus 1% crit.
Yeah.
We want it to be like, I don't know. Yeah.
Weird and interesting. You can just leave it there.
Yeah, I guess, we don't want to share too much, because I guess we don't want to. Apparently, some people like to just spout all the details early.
Some.
You shared the baby shambler. We can share one more.
Okay, you can do one.
The baby crocodilian. I love this because someone I think you sent like one of the discussions yesterday.
Oh, it was on Reddit. Someone was like, they'll never do this, and they'll never read this, but it would be great if we could have a shambler and a crocodilian, but no one will ever see this Reddit post.
And
Chris, all three of us had read it. We're like, we got it covered, guy. Don't worry.
Chris had a notification on his phone. Ding! And it was funny because what'd you say? You're like, we got this person covered.
Yeah.
I like that idea that the crocodilian should just randomly halfway through the journey just eat everyone, because
that doesn't happen.
No, it does not happen. But if we were keeping true with Crimson Court,
you're stream drunk.
Ay. Spiky, Chris. Spiky.
Anyway, yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, so that's two. That's all we got.
That's exciting. Okay, moving back to some character stuff. Sportsy on the Steam chat would like to know, how did you get the idea and inspiration for the Cultists?
The Cultists. The Catholic Church.
Oh, my.
Oh, boy. Take a drink.
Here. The Cultists are kind of otherworldly invaders into the realm of Darkest Dungeon. So the kingdom is like infected by, you're still laughing. We've got this like stain kind of thing happening with the black ink fire everywhere, and from that kind of void is where the cultists come from. So I like them shrouded. I don't want to see how gross they are, but I like alluding to it with little bits. Other than the Herald, he's pretty just bagpipe gross right on the surface. I like a lot of upside down masks, because I don't know if anybody noticed, but in the intro cutscene, like, we talk about the axis of the world being, reversed.
Off kilter.
Yeah, there's a diagram, in the academic study in that cutscene that kind of illustrates a little bit of that abstractly. And so I like the sense that things are kind of like upside down and non-functional. So I didn't take any direct inspiration from like a particular source and go, okay, like, this movie has great cultists, I'm going to move those over. But I wanted them grotesque but fancy, I think is a good word. Like, they have really nice satin clothing and silver trim and fancy stuff like that. And they're a little bit more regal, but then I thought the contrast between that and then their kind of grotesque misshapen flesh was just kind of interesting from a visual standpoint. Other than the exemplar, which is just full on in your face disgusting, but that's a great way to like ramp up into them. So it's just kind of, they represent, like a twisting or a perversion of the natural order and the undoing of things that we consider to be reality. Maybe Mouth of Madness is probably a good touchstone for that. I think it's that's a horror like classic in my opinion. If enough people read these books of fiction that this horror writer wrote, that actually ends up being the way reality begins to change, because reality in his thesis is just a collective agreement on what's real. Fascinating, great film. And I think, I guess maybe subconsciously I was channeling a little bit of that now that I'm only thinking about it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a Sam Neill classic.
It is a Sam Neill classic, and he's had a few.
Yeah. Possession.
Event Horizon.
Have you ever seen Possession?
I've seen Possession.
So good.
I think those three movies are probably deserve to be in a horror hall of fame somewhere.
Absolutely.
Sam Neill delivering.
Hitting it out of the park.
He is. Yeah.
New Zealand's best.
Truly.
All right, so speaking of interesting enemy types, we mentioned it a bit earlier, and this is something we announced a couple weeks ago, but we created a new character that's yet to be released with Make-A-Wish, and Sam, someone from Make-A-Wish, we built together. So Chris, would you like to discuss that a little more in detail, kind of the process behind that, the character He's coming after 1.0, I believe. Right?
Monster.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean,
Yes,
just
sorry,
to be clear, not a
it's-
hero, but
Not a hero, an enemy. Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought it was a scam. First off, we got an email. It's like Make-A-Wish. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, pal.
Sure.
I has candy too, you know. But I read the email, and we got connected with this. I don't want to call him a kid, a young man, I guess. And it was very humbling. It was very touching. This was his wish. I couldn't even get past that. It's like I would have gone for something a little bit more, like, you know, a Virgin space flight or something like that. But his thing, he was just super passionate about Darkest Dungeon, and Darkest Dungeon 2.
played a ton of
played
DD1,
a ton of
yeah.
it, a ton of both of them. And his ultimate wish was to get a character in the game. And we looked at our schedule and we're like, I don't think we can do that, unfortunately. But what we can do is some items, and I'll design the character with you, and then make a print and sign the print. And, you know, would that be okay? And he was, you know, really amazingly gracious and over the moon about that. And then we kind of moved some things around in our schedule, and we're like, well, we can do it if we just don't have to do it today, you know, if we can get to it. And the character's actually been modeled already. So we got on a couple of calls with them. I showed them a bunch of concept art and behind the scenes stuff for Darkest Dungeon 2's development. We talked about the game, you know, some of the things that he really liked and some of the challenges he was having, and that kind of thing. And it was just really, I don't know, it was a very humbling experience to have somebody that just invested and just genuinely, earnestly keen. And so, yeah, we designed this character together, and he even chuckled as he was saying, you know, it's a little bit on the nose, but he wanted a character that could heal diseases, which is kind of pretty, I don't know, it's on the nose, but it's pretty touching. But he wanted it grotesque, and the Gaunts were actually his favorite faction, and so we worked up from there.
And it's the Gaunt's Shurgen.
And he's got a nice big bucket of leeches, and he's got leeches kind of crawling up one arm, and a nice big bone saw, and cool floppy hat, and we're working our way through getting him through the process now of getting modeled and textured. He won't be rigged or animated until after 1.0, but then we're going to put him in the game for everybody. And I think ultimately that was one of the coolest things about this experience, is that, you know, we get to share it with all of you. You know, it was Sam's desire, his wish. We designed it together, but then everybody gets to share in the fruits of that collaboration, which is really cool.
Yeah, and he's really knowledgeable about the game, very mechanically astute and creative, and like the process seemed to go really, like it was as though he was a member of the team in terms of the
best
same.
art director I ever had.
Yeah. And so the team rallied. You know, our own production team rallied, and you know, the people behind the items were like, hey, I think we could actually make these items like now and get them in the game with the relationship update. So that was a case where Chris and I were like, really? Okay. And so they went that extra mile. It was work they hadn't planned on. And so the trinkets from the Gaunt Shurgen and the combat items are already in the game. And that was kind of fun. We dropped them in with no announcement of what it was yet. And they have some really wild gameplay effects. And so immediately our testers are like, what? Yeah. And so, you know, even though it'll take a little longer to get the character in, we got the items in already. And so that's just been, yeah, it's been wild, totally unexpected. But it was something that we just could not say no to. And you know, I think, Chris, you did an awesome job of working with him on it. And I know, like, you had to suddenly draw another character out of nowhere. And, you know, so, yeah, it's humbling to the extreme, and I think it's awesome.
We're just grateful that he felt so strongly about the game, and we're happy to be able to share it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's looking like a super cool character. I
can't wait
to be absolutely crushed by him.
Leeches pouring out of that thing, and it's gonna be awesome.
Sam, if you're watching, hope you're happy with what you've done.
All right, so this is a pretty popular question on both Steam and Discord. I'm not sure how much we want to divulge, if anything, but people want to know, are we going to be seeing some more beloved characters from Game 1 appear, like the Crusader or the Abomination?
We will be seeing more beloved characters appear.
Well, that settles it. Yes.
Right?
More beloved characters. Why not?
More beloved characters.
They're all beloved, aren't they?
Yeah.
In that same vein, do we have plans to add brand new characters after launch?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Cool.
That would be. It's a tricky thing. Like, I really love the whole character roster that we have. I mean, we've talked about it enough, I guess, on this stream alone. But that was a big reason to continue forward from Darkest Dungeon 1 to Darkest Dungeon 2. And so if it were up to, if there was no such thing as time or money, I would have them all in there day one. But we can't because we have more monsters in this one than the first one launched with, and so I really wanted to have all the core guys in and then just keep adding new things. As Tyler said, about an hour ago, we're never short of ideas. So I'm looking forward to designing some fresh faces that fit nicely. I'm really happy with the Runaway. I think she's like a solid character design and fits well with the rest of the crew and has her own thing going on, her own set of shapes. I'm just speaking visually, but so I'm really looking forward to that. But we also want to bring back our favorites, so it's tough to kind of ride that line a little bit. So we've got some kind of fun surprises, coming up for 1.0, and afterwards, we want to keep that going and alternate maybe or do a couple of new ones and then bring back an old one. But really, there's no bigger fans of it than us. So we'd love to just continue to add and grow the game and the cast.
I think that's one of the things that like we've just honestly is something we find kind of interesting is a lot of times people are thinking back on the breadth of the DD1 experience, but that's the breadth after all of early access, after 1.0, after post 1.0 updates, after DLC. They're like, oh, there's like 17 characters or whatever, and it took a while to get there. And so I think that's my hope is that people like this game enough, and we make some DLC, and that even a year after 1.0, a year after this May, that there's even more toys to play with in the DD2 game, right? So, but yeah, it takes a while to do, but they're super fun. I mean, I think DD1. We did characters as part of all the DLCs, and we had the one standalone. Was there a character in Color Menace?
No.
But we had Shieldbreaker, for example, as like a standalone, and that was an experiment. And I think characters work really well as a DLC. I think because every character you add, just like it's a network effect of sort of like
the
design
play
space.
Grows. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, the Shieldbreaker was. I think our first crack at kind of how we do the heroes in Darkest Dungeon 2 with their backstories and
good point.
and really like kind of blowing that out in game. And I think connecting, skill unlocks to reliving their trauma, and hopefully we can put a really nice finish on the game. So the Shieldbreaker was a great experiment, and we kind of carried those learnings forward, and that's sort of what makes a character in Darkest Dungeon 2, except the Bounty Hunter, which remains probably the best decision anyone's ever made.
No question.
But the Shieldbreaker is an illustration of how like mechanically we did something weird outside the skill kit. Yeah. And I remember because you had been just like drawing characters, and we're like, okay, let's just do a simple DLC. It's just the Shieldbreaker by herself, and then he's like, so I have this idea. She has dreams. There are snakes. And I was like, what are you doing?
Because you're like, all we got to do is one character.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's not enough.
You're like, there must be flashback sequences. So, but I think that goes to show how we look at the characters. And that was super fun for us to do as a DLC. So I think, characters as DLC is a safe bet. Not just characters. There might be other things too.
For sure. Big important question. Will the merch store be updated, and can people expect more pins?
I have no idea.
Oh.
How about that? That's just raw honesty.
We're super open to that. We've been so busy with the game. So on DD1, we partnered with Fangamer to do some stuff. I mean, Fangamer, if you're listening, we'd be happy to do more. We've always looked at merch as what's called fan service, and that's not meant to sound degrading at all. It's like, it's not a revenue stream for us that is meaningful, but we think it's really important. I mean, we're staring right now at art books and dioramas because we printed a lot of them and still have some. But I was wearing my Darkest Dungeon hoodie for years until my dog just ripped it last week. So, those are things we would love to do. And it's just hard because we're in the middle of making, and we don't really have a licensing department. Well, you're looking at it, I guess, and
Yeah.
literally probably the three of us. So yeah, we'd love to do more stuff like that, and when we kind of have a chance to get our heads above water.
Yeah, I think the thing for us is that the game always has to come first. We could be chasing down all sorts of deals and ancillary stuff, but ultimately we want to, build our reputation based on the work that we do, and the game is the embodiment of that. So if everybody, if there's an audience for this game and people really enjoy it, then we'll want to make merch when we have time to kind of invest in that. But right now we're all in on the actual core product itself.
Excellent. All right, this is a fun one. What is your favorite character? I think we should do this in two different ways. What's your favorite character to play versus work on?
Go ahead.
I always struggle with favorites. It's like, what's your favorite movie? It's like, can I give you 12? So I'm going to narrow it down to 3. No, so if I had to pick one, I think Plague Doctor, because the design is so striking. I think it was one of our first weird characters, because, she was one of the original 4, and of those 4 is definitely the weirdest. The idea that, and then I think her story is really interesting. I think the hero stories that you play out in this game to see how she is morbid and weird and all this stuff, and I really love lobbing those bombs. I think both in DD1 and DD2 it feels very satisfying to toss the grenades, and she just is so iconic too. I think some of our early like key art or marketing art was the PD, and so if I had to pick one, I would say PD, both visually and mechanically. I just think she's super rad. Yeah.
Cool. Probably Highwayman.
Oh, big surprise.
Yeah. No one is shocked ever.
I mean, he's pretty cool.
I mean, he should be more powerful than the bounty hunter, but apparently my feedback isn't welcome.
Well, I mean, he's in his prison escape. He's got the big guns.
He's
So what else do you do in jail? You work out. Come on. It's actually. I always liked the rogues, but I like the fighter thief. When I played D&D, it was always fighter thief. I like the hybrid, and so that's really like what that character kind of embodies. But it's very, very difficult for me to pick a favorite as well, because I like the Macho Man Randy Savage flagellant too. I don't want to be him. I don't want to be friends with him. I don't even want to know him. But I'm, having designed him, I think there's like some cool craziness about that. I like the leper. I like the Iron Man mouth mask with the weird lizard eye thing. I like the nobility. I like the Plague Doctor too. I like the, we made her a woman, which is kind of like, I don't know, a neat like Samus kind of style reveal. There's just every single character, there's something about them that I like. And I think importantly, there's something about them that I don't like. And I think, if there's anybody who does concept art or character design for a living watching, I think that's like an important thing when you design a character. There should be something that you dislike about them. I don't like fur collars. Highwayman's got a fur collar.
Oh, interesting.
They tickle my neck. I find them irritating. So I think there's something about each of them that I find kind of special. I don't like having a hand chopped off, but I did it to the shield breaker. So.
Yeah, we earlier talked about Leper, and Leper is one that just has always resonated with Chris and I in terms of the creative process, just because it was so sort of weird, and personally, like, I loved it because, like, the first video game I worked on, which was Age of Empires, and some of the historical research I did was all about the Crusades, and there was Baldwin the Leper King and all this stuff, and they did a pretty interesting rendition of him in the Kingdom of Heaven movie from back 15 years ago. And but I also think he mechanically was sort of, there was beauty in the simplicity. But like when reading about, it's weird. We get into weird subjects on, research for DD, but about leprosy. And it's like one of the things is you lose some of the feeling, and therefore you don't know when you're injuring yourself or whatever. And so that we thought we'd translate that into like, he's very powerful, but, of course is not very accurate. And so he spawned a million memes. Well, not just memes, but there was one guy, was it Kazaki? I forgot. There was one of our fans that for years was just like on Twitter posting a new screenshot whenever he'd hit a new high damage
threshold. Yeah.
And I got so much joy out of that.
Yeah,
cool. And then there's like the quad leper memes and all these things. And so I think Leper is just, and he's very uniquely Darkest Dungeon, I think.
Yep.
And the design is awesome. Yeah, the gold, it's just... And then,
I liked it, like the idealized male body, but
Right.
underneath he's a wreck.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's some
thought
nice hooks there for sure. I love a good mask,
Mm-hmm.
I love the Jester. I designed the Jester in high school. And I still have the original drawings of that. It was,
really?
I think I just watched The Crow like 4 times in a row. And I was like, oh!
That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. Do I want bells hanging off me all the time? No, but it makes for fun poses and stuff. Yeah.
And then the Hellion, I say because visually, first of all, it's not that it's not unique, but it's super cool design. Very, I find it very attractive, all these things. But when you know her backstory, there's just so much tension there because, without giving too much away, she was not this complete badass in her backstory. But you play her and she's just an absolute badass in the game, fearless, always kind of, she's a little bit of that juggling, the power versus danger thing. But I think there's a little bit of a cognitive experience of just thinking back to what she was and went through and how it contrasts with how she is in the game. And I guess they're all that way, but I find hers really...
I think she's probably one of the
archetypal.
most opposite, it's like a small man in a Ford F-150. All of that rage and aggression is just covering up all this insecurity.
All right. I think we've got time for one more.
Okay.
I'm not sure, again, if this is something we want to talk about, but what were some scrapped enemy designs?
Who asked this one?
This is from Captain Nesquik.
That's a good name.
It is very good. I am a fan of Nesquik.
Okay, what did we scrap? I had an idea for a whole biome where all you fought was giants. So they were all 4-slot, massive creatures, and I thought that would just be great. And then I realized how much time and money that would cost, and we couldn't do it. I thought
Why are 4 slaughters 4 times as expensive?
Yeah, they're big. You're gonna take 5 textures on them.
It's digital. We don't care how big they are.
We got to keep the texture resolution consistent, so they need more work. Anyway,
I just learned something about game development.
there you go. I didn't get too far into that.
Yeah.
It just seemed like it was kind of a thought experiment. Had an idea for a mini boss. We might still do that. I'll take a drink after this. Like a puppet kind of motif, kind of disgusting, weird hag thing with a puppet. She could make your characters do something, and she had 2 extra fingers or something like that. Be kind of neat. That's still somewhere on a server. Had a headless horseman style guy.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I felt it was it was okay. It's, he's carrying his head around and looking at you and stuff. It's, I guess, maybe more of another mini boss, not like a regular enemy. But there's no shortage of kind of ideas. I think that's kind of the beauty of the space and why we wanted to stay in it.
Yeah.
I don't know how best to do this, but I do, we're almost about to shut it down, but I want to thank and shout out the team.
Yeah, cool.
I don't know if it's worth just naming everybody.
If we name them, we might forget someone.
Yeah.
And that's really... Because we have 25 people, right?
Yeah.
So...
It's
dangerous. I mean, I think that, do we have a dramatis personae on our website? I guess we don't. Well, look for the credits, first of all.
That's a good way to do it, actually.
Yeah.
We'd encourage everybody to look at the credits. There's, we have a very hardworking and diligent team of creative people. And I don't just mean artists, the programmers have to be creative, too. Designers as well. Production,
designers?
even
That's
to
nice.
community. See, I'm doing it now. I got to name everybody. Please take 2 minutes and just look at the credits, if only to appreciate the amount of man or person hours that go into creating a game like this. And it's not unique to our product, but these people are most special to me of all other development teams that I don't know. But yeah, we've had a lot of fantastic contributions. I feel like Tyler and I's job is to steer and keep things on the path forward, not get too distracted, not crash into anything. But that's not to say that every good idea originates from Tyler and I. There's a lot of fantastic contributions, personality, life, polish, that just comes from the people who've been making this game for you. I mean, that's what we're doing. So I just want to thank the team for all their hard work, and it's going to get crazy, and I expect you all to work even harder for the next couple months. But yeah, I think we're very lucky to have this group of people.
Yeah, I think if there's a thing in the game industry of postmortems where you look at a project and usually you try to figure out the 5 things that went well and 5 things that went wrong, and then you give a GDC Game Developers Conference talk. And I with 100% one of the things, regardless of how this game ends up or whatever, that we've done well, I think is build a good team, and that took time. It took years to scale up and get the right people, but I think we've got a great hiring process down, and we've had very few swings and misses, and a lot of swings and successes. And your thing about the pets was a good example of it's been a process for us too to learn to relax and sort of let go of certain things. And it's never better rewarded than when you just see something awesome in the game that maybe you didn't even touch. And we have a lot of that going on.
Yeah. So thank you. And I guess thanks for watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Yeah, we're going to wrap this up. Before you go, make sure you wish list the game.
Thank you.
That hurts.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, head to the Darkest Dungeon 2 Steam page, hit wish list. You'll be notified as soon as we drop on May 8th. And
yeah, thanks for your interest and time. This was it went quick for us. I don't know about for the audience, but it's a lot of fun.
Flew by.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right,
Okay.
join
Thanks,
us tomorrow.
everybody.
We're going to have a live stream, gameplay live stream from 1 to 3 p.m. So you can watch us do that. And we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.